Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for Tuesday, December the 15th, 2020. So I wanted to leave my place earlier today, and I discovered that I couldn't find my mask. And that set me into an absolute panic because, of course, where I live, you can't go anywhere without wearing a mask. And so I tore the place apart for about 15 minutes and no mask to be found. And I thought, well, literally, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And I thought, well, perhaps I can make a mask. So there's various pieces of cloth around the house. Well, I'll just explain first that the reason I couldn't find my mask is because this place is being torn apart now. Because originally I had to be out by the end of the month and then the 28th of the month. But now various things have come up, legal, medical, etc. So I have to be out of this place by Friday. And it's a fairly big place for a condo. It's about 1,350 feet. And my father, my late father, he had a lot of stuff, furniture, clothes, all sorts of other stuff. This stuff all has to be removed. And so there's been an ongoing effort to remove all this stuff. But in the meantime, things have been collected and put all over the place. And I made a habit for decades of things that I use all the time, wallet, keys, etc. Always put them in the same place so I don't panic because I lose them. And I'd been putting my mask, my cloth mask, one of the wraparound types that goes around the back of the head, in the same place. But because things were being removed and collected, I couldn't put it there anymore. And I put it somewhere else and I lost it. I tore up the condo looking for it, couldn't find it, what to do. And so I'll make a mask, and all I need is a pin, like a clothespin, and I can take a piece of cloth and put it around my head. I couldn't find clothespin. So there must be something I can do. I must be able to create something I can put around my face. So rubber bands, not the sort of thing I collect, but I happened to find a couple of rubber bands. And what to cover my face with? Oh, paper napkin. How about that? So I put a paper napkin over my face and I put a rubber band over it. And I'll go down to London Drugs and buy another mask. And when I was in London Drugs, one of the people who work in the store rushes up to me and says, "Oh, can I get you a mask, to replace immediately whatever it is you're wearing, with the paper napkin over my face with the rubber band." So he brings me something, and I don't want a disposable mask. I want a mask which I can use over and over again, like the cloth mask I've had since July. And he shows me something, and it's not what I'm it's not what I'm looking for. So I grab a mask from where they have all the masks, and it's one of those ones that go around the ears. So I walk outside, throw away my paper mask, put this thing over my head. I don't know, maybe I have a large head or something like that. But it took some doing. This is one of the masks that just goes from ear to ear. And I had some trouble getting it to fix onto my face where, it didn't hurt and didn't make me feel like I was suffocating more than I normally do wearing a mask. So I get home, and one of the problems I have is that in the bedroom where I'm staying, there are two lamps on either side of the bed, and it's not very bright in that room. And the cloth mask that I had was entirely black on one side, the face that's on the inside. On the outside, it was patterned black and gray, whatever. And I suspected this might happen, but I don't know, about 4 hours after my big mask panic, where I literally couldn't leave the house, I'm looking for something else amongst my clothes, which are all being packed up, and I found the mask. So it cost me like $9 for a mask I'm never going to use again. But then I was in Vancouver about 2 weeks ago, let's say 2.5 weeks ago. And I visited some of the haunts of my youth. Well, not just my youth, my adulthood, actually, out near the University of British Columbia, where I worked for 12 years. And my bank, well, actually, it's a credit union. It's called Van City. It used to be called Vancouver City Savings. I used to joke that it was the commie credit union because the people who were involved in the leadership of Van City, it was kind of a farm team for the NDP party. But later on, when I got older, I was drawn to this place as opposed to the banks, because these places, Van City places, are staffed by nice middle-aged white ladies. But when I was in Vancouver 2.5 weeks ago, I happened to walk by on West 10th Avenue, a Van City branch, and it said that it was closing permanently. By the end of the year. And there's a normal nonsense there, this will be good for you. Well, why? If I lived like 2-3 blocks away from this branch, why would it be good that this branch was closing? And they said, oh, the closest branch is 5 minutes away. Well, 5 minutes away by car, that's assuming the best possible traffic conditions in Vancouver. And then later that same day, I happened to be walking up Dunbar Street in the 30s, and I found out that the Van City branch there was closing permanently as well by the end of the year. Today, I make a regular check of how much money I have in my Van City bank account, and it told me that the machine told me that my password wasn't working. Well, here's the thing. About a month or two ago, I was told by Van City that I had to come up with a new password because the password that I used wasn't secure enough. So I came up with a password that I couldn't possibly ever remember. And I've written these things down in the past, but, I don't know where they are. I lose them. But I use this Brave browser, and it remembers all my passwords. So it's not a problem, so long as I have my computer. If I ever lose my computer, then I'm in very serious trouble, or if it stops working, So I go to Van City, and they say, your password doesn't work. And I'm thinking, how is it possible that my password couldn't work? Because it's memorized by my computer, and I've been using Brave for 2 or 3 years, and I've never had a problem with it. And so they say, well, call in. And curiously, when I call in, that was about 25 minutes ago. Curiously, normally when you're on a long line of this sort, they say, the estimated next time of speaking to a representative is X number of minutes. They never told me that. They also said that they were changing all of their in-person visits to virtual visits. And I thought, is it their intention to close all of their branches, except maybe one, in a geographical area of, 10, 20 square miles or something? Is that their plan? Because why would you need to go into a bank anymore? You can do it all remotely. Well, there's plenty of things that you go into a bank for which can only be done personally, particularly when they involve, cash changing hands. or buying prepaid credit cards or whatever. And it's funny that at the end of the year, we are now, 16 days from the end of the year, this whole dare to be stupid mode that we're living in seems to be coming to its crescendo. And I have been effectively without a long-term home since April. And now, on the end of the month, I'm going to be moving somewhere. I don't know where. God knows where. But I don't know. I feel like Tommy Wiseau, I'm done with this world. Because the world that I grew up in, which was fairly rational, has been entirely swept aside. And what's going to follow? Who knows? Who knows? I'm sorry if I feel a little, if I come across today feeling more than a little pissed off, but that's a situation where I am in. Let's look at the chat here, which seems to have come to a halt for some reason. Is my show still on? Hello, William Hicks. Popcast88 says there was an ad for The Expanse on Amazon Prime. My first thought was I didn't know Lena Dunham had a new show. Well, thank you. Thank you for making me laugh. Jogakin 666, maybe Tweed or Houndstooth. When I was in London Drugs is like the Canadian equivalent of CVS or something like that, Walgreens. Only it's like halfway between like a CVS and a Walmart, say. They sell a whole bunch of other things, including food. And I'm looking at the masks, and they're all humorous. I do not want to wear a humorous mask. There's only so much humiliation I can take. Of course, one says that. And of course, the older one gets in life, one realizes that the amount of humiliation that any person can suffer is almost infinite. But no, I'm not going to wear one of these stupid masks that has hearts on it or some cutesy saying, or it's supposed to be fashionable or whatever. Yeah, I can imagine, women, they're wearing $2,000 of clothing, and I'm just going to top it off. Chef's Kiss is going to be some sort of $5 mask. No, I don't really think that works. Let's see what else we got here. Frothing Fanboy says, get a friend to knit or crochet you a mask with rather large holes and you won't suffocate at all. Well, that sounds like a good idea. Not that I know anyone who knits or crochets. William Hicks says, sorry to hear that you have to move again, Kevin. Hope you're able to find a place to get settled into for the long term. Well, eventually we all find a place to settle into for a long-term eternity, they call it. David Wright says, I'm going to miss this place. I'm going to miss this place too. But the difficulty of this, well, at least to me, I mean, I'm sure others would regard it in a different way. It's just that if you told me that, if you moved me to an actual mansion and said, yeah, you can live here for free, but you're going to be out of here a month, 2 months, 3 months, anytime. There's we don't know when. I would not be very happy about that. I need a certain level of security, but I'm thinking that when was it? Since 2017, since January 2017, I have not had a permanent place to live. But I do not repine. Rustin Shackelford says, has your old age Gibbs kicked in? No, they have not. The Expanse is actually not bad, surprisingly, says John S. I don't know what that refers to. But it's okay to be white mask. Okay, so enough of my whining. Let's get to the show here. And oh yes, let me start with this. This is not exactly what I'm going to start off talking about, but I was thinking about this earlier because I saw a video which has gone viral of a restaurant owner, I think in New York City, who is being accosted by a man and a woman because apparently he has not crossed the T's and dotted the I's for his restaurant. And he's screaming, "Are you going to pay my rent? Are you going to pay my rent? I followed all the rules." Well, no, actually, you didn't do all the rules in the right way. 10 years on, anger grows in Tunisian town where Arab Spring began. This is from Reuters, December the 15th of this year, today, in fact. From Sidi Bouzid in Tunisia. 10 years ago, a fruit seller set himself ablaze in the central Tunisian town of Sidi Bouzid after an altercation with a policewoman about where he had put his cart. Word of Mohamed Bouzizi's fatal act of defiance quickly spread, sparking nationwide protests that eventually toppled Tunisia's long-serving leader and helped inspire similar uprisings across the region, the so-called Arab Spring. Huge demonstrations broke out in Egypt and Bahrain. Governments fell and civil war engulfed Libya, Syria, and Yemen. I see these videos of these shopkeepers mostly. Oh, and by the way, don't we all love entrepreneurs? Isn't it entrepreneurs that are the way to the future? No, apparently it's only entrepreneurs who get angel investor money. Anyone smaller than that can get hanged. But again, I was thinking about this and I'm thinking we're about this close in North America and certainly in Britain to an Arab Spring situation. Not that our rulers know or care, but they might have cause to regret this in the future. Now, David Pinson saw this and he said, "Yeah, how did the Arab Spring turn out?" And I said, "Well, in Egypt, it ended with a military dictatorship. But as far as I'm concerned, I would rather have a military dictatorship than the rule of clowns and shitheels that we live under today." So William Barr resigned yesterday. There was a thoughtful piece in the American Thinker today by Thomas Lifson. And the gist of his piece is that William Barr was not really the, how would you say, wartime Attorney General that Trump wanted or needed. But it's a white pill story from Lifson. He writes, "The fact that his resignation letter and President Trump's tweets were cordial tells me that an arrangement between the two men was reached. My strong suspicion is that Trump asked Barr to appoint a special counsel to take over and potentially expand the investigation of Hunter Biden already underway by the U.S. Attorney for Delaware, and that Barr declined but offered to resign to allow a successor, for now, Deputy Attorney General Jeffrey Rosen, to appoint a special counsel. If Biden is inaugurated, he could easily demand the resignations of all sitting U.S. attorneys, as has been done by new presidents before. That would relatively quietly kill the investigation of the Biden family's corrupt arrangements with foreign entities and governments, since the media would raise no questions and the social media oligopolists would suppress discussion. But firing a special counsel, while not impossible, is more difficult. You might remember after Jefferson Beauregard III recused himself from the question of the special counsel, Trump was stuck with Mueller for 3 years. It didn't end up with anything. But again, I'm thinking that the Biden administration, again, according to YouTube policy, Joseph R. Biden Jr. won the election. He occupies the office of the president-elect. He won fair and square, and anyone who persists otherwise is a conspiracy theorist who is guilty of disseminating misinformation. That said, once again, Donald Trump is disputing this. Many others on his side are disputing it. And so, as far as I can see, based on my experience as a journalist for several decades, this constitutes news. So I'm going to continue to report this news with the proviso that what I say, these are not my opinions. These are the opinions of the people who are making these claims. Lifson continues with the arrangement that I hypothesize Barr gets to quit and keep honoring the code to which he has devoted his professional life. I bet he understands that having already been attacked as Trump's hatchet man, his only defense is to continue to publicly adhere to the rules. One of those rules is that we now know that Hunter Biden, the crackhead, incestuous, grifting son of Joseph R. Biden Jr., who occupies the office of president-elect, has been under investigation by the FBI for tax evasion and money laundering since 2018, but Barr kept this secret because the Marquess of Queensberry rules, which Lifson refers to, oh, no, this can't be mentioned during an election campaign. Was 2018 really the election campaign? Because it might interfere with the election. Well, the fact that we had this preposterous Russiagate investigation going on for years and years and years, that didn't interfere with the election. But I guess there's, how do they say? Horses for courses. Let's go to Donald Trump and see what he has to say on Twitter. Mo Brooks, Trump won the Electoral College. I can be part of the Surrender Caucus, or I can fight for my country. This is a reference to a Breitbart story. And as Twitter lets us know, multiple sources called this election differently. More from Trump. Tremendous evidence pouring in on voter fraud. There has never been anything like this in our country. And once again, this claim about election fraud is disputed. Lynn Wood, this is a retweet from 19 hours ago. President Trump is a genuinely good man. He does not really like to fire people. I bet he dislikes people, putting people in jail, especially Republicans. He gave Brian Kemp and the Georgia Secretary of State, Raffensperger, I think his name is, every chance to get it right. They refused. They will soon be going to jail. Oh, no. I disavow. Dan O'Donnell at News Talk 1130, he writes, I assume this must be in Wisconsin, perhaps Milwaukee. Democratic State Senator Patrick Schachtner, one of Wisconsin's 10 electors who cast the state's electoral votes for Joe Biden Monday, claimed that she was indefinitely confined to her home ahead of the November election. But pictures posted on her Facebook page show her out and about, campaigning and enjoying leisure time away from home. Schachtner and her husband Joseph appear on the Wisconsin Elections Commission list of nearly 250,000 voters who signed a statement on their mail-in ballots that they were indefinitely confined to home because of age, physical illness, or infirmity, or if they are disabled for an indefinite period. The Wisconsin Elections Commission's list of indefinitely confined voters obtained by the Dan O'Connell Show includes both Schachtner, a Democrat from Somerset who lost her bid for re-election last month, and her husband. The list does not include the date on which Schachtner first claimed to be indefinitely confined, but a review of her official Facebook page shows that she was most certainly not confined to her home, as she campaigned for re-election and engaged in leisure activities. On August the 5th, she posted a picture of herself without a mask while speaking at the opening of a new Quick Trip store. Quick, of course, is spelled Kwik. And she tweeted on August the 5th, "I was excited to celebrate the grand opening of the new Quick Trip on North Richmond's North Side yesterday. It was great to be able to responsibly celebrate this new addition to the state." Everyone else in this photograph is wearing a mask except for her for some reason. Nearly 2 months later, she posted a picture of herself and her husband, who also claimed to be indefinitely confined, while enjoying all the wonderful natural resources that our state has to offer. Tweet, "It's National Public Lands Day and Hunting and Fishing Day. So Joe and I are going to get out and enjoy all the wonderful natural resources that our state has to offer. I hope you will too." Well, if there are no consequences for this sort of behavior, what difference does it make? You can do whatever you like. Jim Hoft, a Gateway pundit, published today, Donald Trump won the state of Georgia in 2016 by 6 percentage points and over 200,000 votes. President Trump is the most popular Republican in U.S. history. In 2020, we won over 74 million votes that we know of. We also now have evidence that Dominion voting machines, this is against the confirmed narrative, so it must be denounced. We're switching votes from President Trump to Joe Biden. The 2020 election was entrenched in fraud. Ditto. This is unconfirmed misinformation. The liberal media wants you to believe that Georgia flipped to Democrat during the Trump years. And there is an interview. President Trump retweeted Linwood this morning, which I mentioned earlier. Interesting thing about this dispute, which is that apart from, I don't know, Republican leaders, the people who supported Trump up to and including November the 3rd still seemed to be supporting him, despite the fact that the media has shown absolutely no interest in claims of election fraud because of their circular logic. The claims of election fraud are irrelevant and certainly false because Joe Biden won the election. Simple as that. You don't need to know any more than that. But again, here from Gateway Pundit, Michigan Legislature committees subpoena election evidence, hard drives, laptops, emails from Detroit and suburb of Livonia. There is many such stories. I don't know how much I want to go into them because it's essentially the same story again and again. Now, the claims of election fraud through various means, ballot stuffing, recounting ballots, vote switching through glitches, or whatever they call them. It's the same claims over and over again, but they continue to multiply. But again, it's all irrelevant officially because Joe Biden won the election. Let's go back to the chat. Hopefully he'll now get the inheritance, says Chogokin 666. Okay, I'll tell you a little bit about this. One is that no money can change hands until the will has been probated, and the will cannot be probated until my father's 2020 tax returns are filed and then accepted by the federal government. When that will be, I have no idea. Best case scenario is in the spring. Middle case scenario is sometime in the summer. Worst case scenario is sometime in 2022. It's not something that I'm looking for. It's not something that I'm saying, oh, well, I will have this by that time, because I don't know that I will have it by that time or by any time because of the nature of things that have happened here. There is always the possibility of lawsuits from interested parties. Frothing Fanboy says no security anymore, even if you have a paid for house. Chogakin 666, someone bequeath him an ancestral manor, FFS. No, it's funny. Years ago, you forgive me for being personal about this. In the late 90s, when I was managing editor of BC Report, and through that job, and through various freelance things that I was doing in journalism and in talk radio, I was earning about $75,000 a year, which was, I guess, about $10,000 or $15,000 more than the average salary for family in Canada. And I was living on the west side of Canada, or Vancouver rather, and I would walk through nice neighborhoods and I'd look at the houses and how much they cost. And then sometimes you would, walk by and you see on the grass a sign and it would give you all this information and how much the property tax was. Because I remember in years past, the mother of my children carrying on at me about the idiocy of being a renter, how you have to pay someone else's mortgage. Well, there's certain advantages to being a renter, which is that any damage that happens to your apartment is not your responsibility. Also, you don't have to pay condo fees. Also, you're not subjected to the rule of the condo administration, which in recent weeks I've discovered it's rather like living on an Indian reserve or in a communist country. But perhaps most important, you don't have to pay property taxes. And seeing the property taxes on places on the west side of Vancouver, I thought, would I even be saving money compared to my rent, considering how much this is expensive, how expensive it is? Let's get back to the chat here. John S. says to David, yep, but you ain't going to be watching much besides old movies if you can't tune out the pause. Well, it's a funny thing that I used to read the AV Club a lot. There are a lot of very clever people on that, particularly in the chat and the boards, the comment boards. But then, I don't know, what was it, 5 years ago or so, they decided that every old movie was going to have to be judged by the standards, the woke standards of today. And so their columns and largely became useless. Pete Ferguson says, KMG, have you spoken with Luke since your defenestration? No, I have not. But then we never spoke before. We had a strictly professional relationship. Okay, say Robinette. Oh, okay. Robinette, okay, in R. Yes, I will do that in the future. Thank you for that. Earl Pipe says, Hunter Biden, a man whose depthless shame and insecurity led him to the personal hell just as deep and dark. Joseph Robinette Biden Jr. continually says how much he's proud of his son. Why is he proud of his son? Because of his personal struggles. Okay. All of us have personal struggles in our life. I mean, hell, even, Joe Biden and Jeff Bezos have personal struggles in our life. But again, becoming a crackhead and being involved in an incestuous relationship with your brother's widow. Oh, and the, what do they call it? Hydrocolonic therapy and all the rest of it. I understand familial piety, but again, if I were in that position, I would have asked my son, oh, okay, so what countries are you involved in? Oh, the Ukraine, China. Well, I guess I can't be involved in those countries because there's an obvious apparent conflict of interest. But we learned, from the New York Post and from Tucker Carlson that there are very serious accusations that Joe Biden himself was on the take which our media decided not to cover. I say our media, that is the Canadian media. The American media, apart from the New York Post, no, not going to do it. Of course, my media in Canada, this story about Justin Trudeau being thoroughly ticked off because the Red Chinese Army was not allowed to train in Canada. It first came out of the rebel media, of course, which is Ezra Levant. And then it was picked up by the Globe and Mail, which is one of Canada's, perhaps Canada's most respectable newspaper. They didn't attribute the rebel media and Ezra Levant. And then the National Post picked it up. But CTV News and, as far as I know, Global, and of course the CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, decided, no, we're not going to talk about this. The story is based on declassified government records. Okay, Chad Chadson, our valiant moderator, says, true, they say they're removing spam. Congratulations on your inheritance, Earl Pipe. I haven't seen a dime, and frankly, if I see a dime before I die, I will be surprised. I don't mean to sound gloomy, but I really had no idea before this started. I knew my father was deathly ill from November of last year, and he died in May. But I didn't really expect anything from him because we weren't very close. And then I found out I was in the will. But then I find out just how complicated the probate of a will is. Earl Pipe says, yeah, AV Club became unreadable. Popcasso88 says the Shield is multiracial, but is very red-pilled. I very much like the Shield. And in fact, if you're going to look at all of the, the shows that last for 50, 60, 70 hours, like Mad Men and Breaking Bad, and all the rest, I would say the Shield has the most perfect ending of any of them. Contracu says, call me a contrarian, but I actually respect how Joe Biden defends Hunter despite the myriad of political reasons to do otherwise. He may be corrupt, but he does at least have some loyalty. This is true. I would be more impressed by this if Joe Biden were not involved in this personally and directly. Because in defending Hunter Biden, Joe Biden is defending himself. So he has a vested interest in this. Let's get back to it here. This is from the conservative treehouse. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis recommits to all Florida restaurant and bar owners will always stay open. These folks have the right to work, and I'm glad to hear that. From National File, Mitch McConnell has family ties to Bank of China, top Chinese shipping firm. Cocaine Mitch is married to a Chinese woman, isn't he? Let me just check this. Let me just confirm this. And not just any ordinary Chinese woman, if I recall correctly. Here we go. Just let me scroll down here. Elaine Chao, Mitch McConnell's wife, presumably his second wife, is named Elaine Chao, Secretary of Transportation, having assumed office on January 31st, 2017. She was previously Secretary of Labor under President George W. Bush. Born in Taipei, Taiwan, Chao immigrated to the United States when she was 8 years old. Let's see what Scott Adams have to say. Democracy dies in darkness. This is a retweet from Ben BC. Eric Swalwell scandal coverage. CBS 0 minutes since December the 8th, which was a whole week ago. CBS 0 minutes, NBC 0 minutes, ABC 2 minutes 15 seconds, MSNBC 0 minutes, CNN 3 minutes 17 seconds. From From an hour ago at Scott Adams' prediction, Biden will have a major brain melt within days of getting the vaccination, and half the public will think there is a connection. Well, there could be a connection. It's my understanding that it's the top-up shot that really brings people over the top. A retweet from Greg Price: Biden's pick for energy secretary has spent the last 4 years as a cringe Twitter troll and Russia truther. Is that Jennifer Granholm? Really? Okay. Yeah, I think that the Biden incoming would be putative, as you will. Biden administration could have worked a little harder to find people for his administration who are not the most obvious compromise hacks. A little fresh air, maybe. Oh, Scott Adams retweets something from The Onion. You're a piece of shit, and I hope everyone like you dies, says Biden to Democratic voter in stirring call for public unity. Joe Biden gave a speech yesterday in which he was coughing and spluttering almost without end. And it was a very nasty speech, actually. But it hit me that Biden had said that he had a cold. Now, what we've learned from the Centers of Disease Control is that the cold and influenza have disappeared. They don't exist anymore. So the fact that no less a person than Joe Biden could come down with a cold, oh my God, what does that mean? Does this mean that these wet season killers are back on top of COVID-19? I guess it's going to be masks forever, isn't it? Masks forever. And what is up next? Let's go to J5. I like to go to J5 Killer because he's a calmer person than me and more optimistic. He retweets Lauren Boebert. Besides the video footage, voice recordings, data analysis, statistical impossibilities, sworn affidavits, and eyewitness testimony, there's absolutely no evidence of voter fraud. Exactly. From Miss Michigan at @Correct the Media, the forensic audit that exposed Dominion software in Michigan was performed by MIT and Harvard-trained NASA cybersecurity experts. Keep that in mind as you watch your official local and national news sources desperately try to discredit. And the claim, again, is that Antrim County had a failure rate of 68.05%. J5 tweet: Trump stood up for the GOP, but the GOP won't stand up for Trump. If that happens, I hope he burns the party to the ground with no survivors. Code Monkey Z, or Ron, tweeted: in the past hour or so, I have been reached out to by a dozen or so journalists from different publications, coincidentally asking the same question. MSN has their marching orders. J5 Killer says, I always defer such questions to my media consultant, Jokeocracy. He has a special knack for handling journalists. Do you remember this story? Someone in the mainstream media, what was this, like 3 years ago, said, I want to do an interview with you. Oh, because you're so controversial and so interesting. So we made an arrangement and then changed the arrangement and said, well, you have to go here instead of there. And then he changed it again, and he may have changed it one more time, but then he never showed up, which is pretty funny. This is the way to treat the media. Let's go back to the chat here. I apologize again that my show seems a little more non-linear than it normally is. But you work with what you are dealt with. Will you be keeping the flowers? No, sadly, I'm going to lose the flowers because there's no way that I could take them on a plane, and there's no way that I could take them on a ferry. So, that's the way that it goes. As Michelangelo famously wrote, everything that is created must perish. What else do we have here? I'm not on Blump's side, but I will still dispute, says Jonathan Ferguson, that Joe Biden legitimately won the election. Well, of course, we know, since YouTube has commanded us to say so, that Joe Biden won the election. It is almost certain that the election was, again, YouTube has, what was the old saying? Man disposes, God disposes. No, I've messed that up. Sorry, man proposes, God disposes. The current version of this is that man proposes, Google disposes. So I cannot, despite the fact that President Trump won 17.8% more votes than in 2016, and Jonathan Ferguson doesn't say this, but it is exceedingly unusual for a second-term president to get more votes than in his first-term election. Despite this, Google has decided the truth, and it's more than one's job's worth to stand against Google's truth. Oh, Jonathan Ferguson again. No, nobody's going to jail. The deep state globalists control the FBI and the DOJ. Earl Pipe, it says a lot for our current society that he's the most sacred cow, where our mainstream, presumably media, decided that decorum must be observed around. Okay. Wandering Spurg, I suspect average median salary is a lot lower than that, especially 20 years ago. Well, as far as working class white males go in both Canada and the United States, their wages have been stagnant in real terms or have fallen since the 1970s. The wages of women have increased tremendously, but I guess it was in the 1970s that we first began to discover that white men, particularly white working class men, are the worst people on earth. Anran says, how do you euthanize artificial flowers? I don't know. I suppose if it comes to it, I mean, this thing here, how much does this thing cost? It costs $50? It costs $100? I suppose I could, come up with replacements for them. I don't know exactly where I would find them, but Random Number Generator says that Pete Buttigieg will be a great transportation secretary. Watch, he will launch a Hershey Highway Public Works project. Yeah, let me see if I can find this, what David Pinson sent to me. We were talking about the Arab Spring and where this led to. Again, a military dictatorship in Egypt. The same people who were squalling for democracy, when they got the Muslim Brotherhood a democracy, then they decided that this was the worst thing on earth, and they didn't really want that. David Pinson tweeted, Kevin's response to my question of how it ended, I was thinking of Egypt too, but I think it's essentially the same system they had before, just with a somewhat younger autocrat. My concern is something similar would happen here, like we end up under Pete Buttigieg. And my response to that was, I don't think a dictatorship of McKinsey and Company would be long for this world. What do these people have to offer anyone who don't work for McKinsey and Company, who don't make money by rigging the bread market in Canada, which is something seriously that Pete Buttigieg did? I was talking about a doctor Joe Biden yesterday. It was very amusing. Tucker Carlson was thinking the same thing as me. This is from the Daily Mail. Tucker says Joe Biden has the same degree as Dr. Bill Cosby, which I pointed out on last night's show, and Dr. Pepper. Sadly, I did not come up with that joke, and believes she suffers a bad case of status anxiety in response to backlash over, quote, misogynistic Wall Street Journal op-ed. In 2007, at the age of 55, she got a doctorate in education, so she's got the same degree as Dr. Bill Cosby. You know, I've read a lot about, well, no, who's this, Dr. Oz? What's Dr. Oz's first name? I was going to say Amos, but I think that's an Israeli author. And this fellow, I hope I'm not confusing him with someone else. This fellow who had a talk show on American TV, he got a medical degree from the University of Pennsylvania at the same time that he got an MBA from the Wharton School. And I'm thinking, this guy is not only a sucker for punishment, but he must be like the smartest person alive. Or, you know, maybe there's 100 people in the world smarter than him. Most people do not like going to grad school for the reason that you were entirely, utterly dependent upon your thesis supervisor. And your thesis supervisor says, you know, jump higher. No, jump higher than that. Oh, and by the way, you know, that plan for your thesis, which I approved, I've changed my mind. I want you to do something different now. And if you don't bend the knee whenever they speak, you'll lose everything. You will absolutely lose everything. On the other hand, there's people like Joe Biden who got a bachelor's degree and then 2 master's degree. And then she decides at the age of 55 to get a doctorate, a worthless doctorate. One would have thought that a woman of 55 years old, you know, especially with her husband being who he was and her children and all the other things that people normally like to do in life, it's like, I'm in my 50s now. I'm going to get a doctorate again from a no-name university so that I can do what? That I can teach remedial English at Northern Virginia Community College or whatever the hell it is. I mean, this has to be about status. An interesting piece from Gunnerg.com, Rule of Law ends in Los Angeles. I envy Gunner Q. I envy the devil. His servants get results. New Los Angeles' new district attorney, proudly and openly funded by Soros, just like San Francisco, had a very busy first day in office. And essentially, there's no laws there anymore. I don't know, unless you kill someone or try to kill someone. I guess you'd still be let out on bail without any money. And it is now in Los Angeles that is, for most criminals, it's very hard to be arrested for anything. And there is a exception there for repeat offenders. Let me read from the summary from sovietman.wordpress.com. There's recently been some angst about suppression of news. No, that's from the later story. The end of rule of law in LA. Offenses such as trespassing, burglary, threats, underage drinking, public drunkenness, and others are now just about impossible to prosecute. LAPD will tolerate this treachery, and I'll never understand why. The constant repeat offenses exception is funny because you can't have repeat offenses if you never prosecute the first offense. So criminals are free to do whatever they want, short of arson and knockout game. Plus, the hallucinating tweaker psychotics now enjoy blanket immunities from prosecution. I have family still in LA. I'll send tasers to the conservative ones and happy vibes to the liberal ones. Merry Christmas. Is this the world that you thought that you were going to live in? I'm speaking to older people here. George Costanza used to complain that we were promised moving sidewalks and flying cars. Moving sidewalks, I only ever saw them once in 1976 at Charles de Gaulle Airport in Paris. Flying cars was obviously a non-starter because we have enough problems with cars causing serious damage and death. But, when a car goes off the road, what's the worst that can happen? Well, it can smack into a bunch of pedestrians, or maybe it will hit a building or go through a plate glass window. But imagine a flying car 10 stories up, and then it loses power, and then it crashes through an apartment building, or it falls through to the street, killing 10, 20, 50, 100 people. No, flying cars were never on the cards. But did you ever expect that you were going to live through the end of Law and Order? That Law and Order, as everyone had understood it, was going to come to an end? That we were going to return to the days of early 18th century London, where it's every man for himself, and you better have a sword stick or some sort of pistol? But of course, can you still have pistols in California? And carrying a sword stick, I think you'd be in very serious trouble if you tried that. This, Tom Wolfe, he wrote about the obiter dictum. Obiter dictum is a legal term. It means the words in passing. And Tom Wolfe pointed out that the words in passing are often, or perhaps usually, the most important words, because people say things when they think it's not particularly important or relevant, or people aren't paying attention, but it gives away the game. This is from M. Catherine Evans at the American Thinker. At the conclusion of his keynote speech to colleagues attending the Harvard Global Health Institute's 2018 Outbreak Week, Dr. Anthony Fauci made a stunning truth in jest admission. In a follow-up Q&A, Fauci was asked about the relationship between allergies and infectious diseases. He explained that historically there has been a link between the immune response and infections. Well, everybody knows that. Then, in an unguarded, rare moment of unintended disclosure, the director of the NIH's National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases added, quote, "Immunology grew out of infectious diseases, and, as I always joke with my co-institute directors, that probably sooner or later, every disease is going to turn out to be related to an infectious disease. Just kidding. That's just me wanting more money," unquote. Coincidentally, Fauci's just kidding moment is now being played out in 2020, where medical experts, the media, and early Armageddon pandemic models have massaged COVID-19 is the mother of all diseases. Unlike other deadly pandemics, most recently H1N1 in 2009, with more than 60 million Americans infected, the coronavirus has become a 24/7 news story. Daily, sometimes hourly, case and death counts from state officials are now part of the national consciousness. A pandemic is globality at its highest level, Fauci said. Affecting the global economy and security, it has also affected Dr. Fauci's bottom line. His NIAID has gotten $1.5 million in COVID-19 funding, making it the leading recipient of the money that Congress has given to the NIH in 3 pandemic-related spending bills, much of it designated for research into treatments, vaccines, and diagnostics, according to Science magazine. In addition to his prowess in spinning infectious diseases into billions of dollars, Dr. Fauci's 50-minute speech also includes some choice gems about getting distrustful people to accept a new vaccine by choosing the right messenger and the right message. Vaccine. We're going to have some polling here. You may have heard me speak about this. Polling is useful in certain contexts. If you want to find out what people think about questions which have been discussed endlessly for some time, and what are a few of those? Abortion is one, capital punishment is another, immigration is another one. As for the rest of it, it's simply manufacturing consent. Manufacturing consent. And there was a particularly preposterous and offensive example of this that I came across on National News Watch today, which is sort of like the Canadian Drudge, only even more left-wing than Drudge has become, where there seems to be a significant polling company component to it. And we are told all of these amazing things about what Canadians think. And the problem is that Canadians are not thinking about these things. They simply aren't. What are Canadians interested in? What are Americans interested in? Well, as far as foreign policy goes, Canada's not important in the world in that respect, so it's not an issue. Canadians are interested in, well, their personal conditions and how that is affected by government decisions. They're interested in their pensions. They're interested in government decisions which are going to affect their ability to get jobs, to keep jobs, to retire, to buy property, to raise families, that sort of thing. But there's a polling company in Canada called Abacus, which constantly brings up the most amazing polls, which have absolutely no relevance whatsoever. Oh, here we go. I found it here. Check this out. This couldn't get any funnier. In the latest round of survey work by Clean Energy Canada and Abacus Data, 2 out of 3 people in Canada, 67%, believe that President Biden's election will help make electric vehicles a growth industry, and that Canada should do everything we can to attract electric vehicle manufacturing here. I'm going to step out on a limb and suggest that maybe 1,000 people in Canada have thought about this. And these 1,000 people have a direct pecuniary relationship with this question. So what does the election of Joe Biden mean? Well, that asshole Trump is out of power. And, maybe they start thinking about how it's going to affect the economy or COVID-19 or foreign policy. Electric vehicles and how that affects Canada, I don't know, is number 7,837 on that list. But as I say, manufactured consent. Most Americans will likely get a COVID-19 vaccine, survey says. This is from Jackie Sallow at the New York Post. 7 out of 10 Americans say they will definitely or probably get a COVID-19. A new survey has found the new statistic, 71%, is a considerable jump from September when 63% said they'd get the jab, according to a Thursday poll from the Kaiser Family Foundation. Kaiser Family Foundation, does that have anything to do with the medical profession? Oh, according to Wikipedia, its legal name can cause confusion as it is no longer a foundation or a family foundation and is not associated with Kaiser Permanente, which is an American integrated managed care consortium based in Oakland, California, funded by industrialist Henry J. Kaiser and physician Sidney Garfield, which has 305,000 employees, net income of $2.7 billion, and revenue of $84.5 billion. But they're separate now, so doesn't have anything to do with it. As far as my country goes, let's see. This is from Steve Watson, at Summit News. The health minister of Ontario in Canada has stoked controversy by suggesting that people who do not take the coronavirus vaccine will face restrictions on where they can travel and spend time. When asked by reporters about how the government intends to go about convincing people to get the vaccine, Health Minister Christine Elliott warned that those who refuse it will face difficulties reintegrating into society. Quote, "That's their choice. This is not going to be a mandatory campaign. It will be voluntary." There may be some restrictions that may be placed on people that don't have vaccines for travel purposes to be able to go to theaters and other places, unquote. When another reporter asked if the government would be introducing immunity passports or proof of vaccination cards, Elliott said yes, because that's going to be really important for people to have for travel purposes, perhaps for work purposes, for going to theaters or cinemas or any other places where people will be in closer physical contact. So who's this Christine Elliott woman when she is at home? I paid some interest to this woman some years ago. I see she's almost an exact contemporary of mine. She is the widow of former Canadian Minister of Finance, Jim Flaherty, who died in 2014. This is what I found in 2014, well, 2015. Let me find this out. When she ran for the leadership of the Conservative Party of Ontario in 2015. And when her husband, the finance minister, died, we were told that, oh my God, we're all shocked. We're all gobsmacked. I mean, no one saw this coming. We are just wandering around in a daze because who knew that Jim Flaherty was going to die? Now, shortly after Jim Flaherty's death, Christine Elliott announced that she was running for the leadership of the Conservative Party of Ontario Party of Canada, Conservative Party. And so I thought, and a lot of people thought, well, she must be some sort of monster. Because, I mean, you know, if you've known people in your own family or otherwise who've been very sick for a long time, this often happens with cancer patients, that they're on death's door for 2, 3, 4 years or whatever, and then they die. And sometimes people are scandalized because after the death, the survivors seem to move on very quickly. And the reason for that is because they've suffered so much over the years. They're kind of inured to it, and the death comes as a kind of relief and release. But Flaherty's death was supposed to be a total shock to everyone. So why would his widow barely wait until his corpse was cold before running for the leadership of the Ontario Conservative Party? And then the other shoe dropped, which was, oh, yes, I knew my husband was dying for some time before he died. It's just like Jack Layton all over again. So apparently we have people who are in serious positions, or like Jim Flaherty, who's, you know, he's kind of important. He was important to Canada in terms of its standing in the world. Its financial standing, which is important, you know, interest rates, bonds, all that sort of thing. But they just lied about it. They lied about it. And this was just another brick in the wall for me to create the structure that convinces me that governments always lie. That's now my reflexive position. I go to what the old communist Claude Coburn said. And I saw Peter Hitchens talking about this a few months ago. Maybe Coburn wasn't the first person to say it, but it goes like this. Never believe anything until it has been officially denied. Story by Tyler Durden at Zero Hedge. A new study has revealed that SARS-CoV-2, the virus which causes COVID-19, infects the testicles and likely impacts male fertility. Recall in March, we reported that doctors in central Wuhan, what do I care what they think? They're all liars. Raised concerns over testicle damage after observing a lowered ratio of testosterone to luteinizing hormone, whatever that happens to be. Now, 9 months later, a team of 14 researchers from Wuhan, China, has published disturbing evidence from a small sample, how small, of patients that COVID-19 not only infects the testicles, but may interfere with sperm production by causing inflammation and massive loss in young sperm cells. 5 COVID-19 patients included in the study were aged 51, 62, 70, 78, and 83 years of age, while control patients were 71, 78, and 80. Are you kidding me? How many men over 51 father children? How many men over 62 father children? How many men over 70, 78, or 83 father children? This is textbook fake news. Season finale, McConnell finishes Trump. Yes, he embraced the occupant of the office of President-elect, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr. This is Lockdown Skeptics from Jonathan Barr. Here we go again. And I like this as a quotation from Albert Einstein. There is no vaccine against stupidity. Matt Hancock raised the alarm in Parliament yesterday when he said that a new variant of coronavirus, oh no, was doing the rounds and linked this to the rise in community infections in Kent and London. Okay. And a paper in Nature by Francois Ballot and others provides some helpful context. He pointed out in a Twitter thread that he and his team had identified 12,000 variants or mutations, none of which increased transmission or led to more severe infections. That's what happens to viruses. They mutate. Oh, yes. Can't get enough of tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. The other big story yesterday was that London will be placed in tier 3 at 1 minute after midnight on Wednesday morning, along with South and West Essex and South Hertfordshire. The move means that 34 million people, 61% of the English population, will be living under the highest level of COVID-19 restrictions. Yes, let's just keep locking people down because that has worked so well since March. Is the rise in community infections an artifact of increased testing and false positives? Even if it were, it wouldn't make any difference because no one is interested in the truth. Tedros Ghebreyesus, Director General of the World Health Organization, stands accused of aiding genocide during his time as a government minister in Ethiopia. Would anyone be surprised by that? I quite like this, and you might want to remember this part. The compliant attitude of the British public to the government's heavy-handed restrictions, the lockdowns, mask wearing, travel restrictions, and so on, has been a notable feature of the COVID-19 crisis. Dr. Gary Sidley, a lockdown skeptics reader and a psychologist, said that this has much to do with the fear engendered by the psychologists employed in the behavioral insights team. Does that sound incredibly sinister or what? The behavioral insights team? Their approach to terrifying the public is based on the acronym MINDSPACE, according to Dr. Sidley, which he summed up in a blog post here in brief. Messenger. We are influenced by the source of the information. Incentives. We employ predictable shortcuts such as strongly avoiding losses. Norms. We are strongly influenced by what others do. Defaults. We go with the flow of preset options. Salience. Our attention is drawn to what is novel and seems personally relevant. Priming. Our acts are often influenced by subconscious cues. Affect. Our emotions powerfully shape our actions. Commitments. We seek to be consistent with our public promises. And finally, ego. We act in ways that make us feel better about ourselves. Mindspace. Messenger, incentives, norms, defaults, salience, priming, affect, commitments, ego, MINDSPACE. He has written a letter to the British Psychological Society highlighting the ethical implications of the strategy, which he believes may constitute a breach of psychologists' professional code of ethics. I mentioned previously from Lockdown Skeptics this chain Weatherspoons, which has been pretty much locked down. A branch of Spoons down in Faversham caused a bit of stir yesterday of putting up some posters in one of his stories. Kent Online has the story. Pub chain giant Weatherspoon has been branded socially irresponsible for displaying anti-lockdown messages from its newsletter in the window of one of its outlets. The move has angered a town councillor who says the posters play down the seriousness of the infection when Swale is suffering especially high numbers of cases. Councillor Hannah Perkin spotted the newsletter pages posted in the window of the leading light Weatherspoon in Faversham today and posted her anger on Twitter. This is especially dangerous in Swale, where we have some of the highest rates in the country, she wrote. This is socially irresponsible and not the way out of Tier 3. Speaking to Kent Online, she said Swale's rates are still quite high, and I think it's concerning when public health experts are telling us that we really should be abiding with government guidelines. Well, yeah, here we go. As the joke goes, broke, empirical evidence, woke, hysteria, bespoke, moral outrage. Some woman is really upset about people displaying facts, actually, empirical evidence about COVID-19. Don't you know you're all supposed to be scaring yourself to death? What is wrong with you? So long as we lock ourselves up till the end of time or natural death, whichever comes first, everything will be okay. Okay. Apparently someone's talking about the University of British Columbia here. On the subject of liberal academia, we've had a couple more entries to our contest for a woke English translation of this tweet from the Rhodes Trust. And this is indeed from the Rhodes Trust. Billy Ray Belcourt, Prairies and Wexham, Oxford 2016, is an assistant prof in the creative writing program at UBC. He aims a sociological eye on the nexus, I know what that word means, of race, gender, and sexuality to imagine forms of queer ingenuity that exist in the register of futurity. Okay, here's an explanation. Billy and Ray are modern alchemists. They can make gold from anything or less. Undaunted by empirical evidence that older alchemical methods had failed because the real elemental nature of the target metal resisted synthesis, Billy and Ray pursue instead a dog-legged two-stage approach. First, an entirely fictional, idealized currency is created by combining precise quantities of self-importance, outrage, and fashionable abstract nouns. This mind-dependent currency is then exchanged in meticulously concocted conditions of academic credulity and fear for the real thing. It is to be noted that the idealized substance has a highly unstable ontological nature, depending as it does on the maintenance of complex illusion on the part of both its creators and market makers in the academic community. This would be threatened if Billy or Ray were ever to develop any real creative output, hence their employment roles. Billy and Ray used to worry that their fraud was too transparent, but not these days. Okay, I think that's enough from Lockdown Skeptics. Let's see what Alex Berenson has to say. The usual suspects will hate me for saying so, but the truth is the truth. We have solid CDC mortality data through mid-November, and it is clear that we are now massively overcounting COVID deaths and have been for months. This wasn't true in the spring, it is now. An even simpler way to think about it, during the week of April 4th, we reported 10,000 COVID deaths and 72,000 total deaths. During the week of November 15th, we reported 9,300 COVID deaths, nearly the same as that April week, but 61,500 total deaths, 11,000 fewer overall. The only reasonable explanation is that massive testing combined with our death coding rules now mean that we are classifying a huge number of elderly deaths as COVID, whether they are with or from. I'll just say in my my own case, and I don't want to dwell on this, and I'm looking for sympathy. The sorry window has closed, as Larry David would say. My father died on May 5th, and I know that he had been diagnosed with COVID-19. I've seen his death certificate, but it doesn't say what the cause of death was. I rather thought that was the point of a death certificate, that it would explain the cause of death, but in the copy that I have, it does not say so. Berenson is, he's worried about the rushing of vaccines to market. He writes, the sad fact is that if public health authorities hadn't flat out lied about masks and lockdowns and inflammatory syndrome and long COVID and everything else for 9 months, we could all be more confident in their vaccine push because effectiveness does look good. But the trials are flawed, far too few people at high risk, and the side effects are real. And the push to force vaccinations is only going to grow. And I no longer trust the public health establishment, much less the media, to be honest about the risks and benefits here. And this is a problem, which we've seen in the United States, well, particularly amongst Black people in the United States. They believe the government lies to them, and so the government says, yeah, here's some radical experimental vaccine, which of course isn't a vaccine, and you all have to get it or else. So it is not surprising to me that a great many people, particularly Black people in the United States, do not want to take this virus. I told you my own view. I'm not interested in it. I really am not. Because I don't trust these people, for a start. And, well, why do I need it? Seriously, what's the risk from the virus versus the risk that I would normally face from COVID-19? Does the one balance out the other? Let's go to the chat. Wandering Spurg says we need to prioritize sperm counts for the 50-plus crowd. Contraco, you hear that? COVID-19, whatever, your days in London are numbered. Tier 3 coming right at ya. Wandering Spurg again. What happened to that Canadian doctor over in China? Bruce something? Not familiar with that. What is this? Gamion says, an article for our Times from the New York Post. Wannabe Instagram star allegedly ripped mom's heart out in shocking murder. Was there meth involved, perhaps? They just concocted jargon stew. It's so hilarious. I have rather prided myself over the years. Perhaps it's because of the years that I spent working at a university, and the years I've spent, reading academic stuff, reading highbrow journals, that I could keep up with the latest jargon. Perhaps it's a function of my age or a function of my uninterest, but I'm rather losing it. I remember when I was 15 years old, I became obsessed with Alexander Solzhenitsyn. And I read all of his works that were available, and I read all of the critical works on him. And I remember reading this book by György Lukács, a famous Hungarian communist, on Solzhenitsyn, who took kind of a middle view on it. It's not a very long monograph. I don't know, it's like 100 or 125 pages. But some years later, I don't know, like 20 or 25 years later, I don't know, I think I was writing something about Solzhenitsyn, and I had occasion to refer to the Lukács monograph, and I started reading it, but I wasn't reading it because there were a series of words there in concatenation, and it's, what? None of this makes any sense to me. Bolshevik talk, they used to call it, and I've lost my ability to understand Bolshevik talk. My trail of disgrace says, unless I'm forced to take it or required to do so from work, I'd prefer to wait 6 to 12 months to see what happens to the vaccinated. And after that, what would be the point? Yes. David Wright says, sounds like average reading for a 12-year-old. Okay. It was unusual in that respect, I suppose. Remember when I was in grade 12, I read Cornelius Ryan's book, The Last Battle, which was about the Battle of Berlin. And it was really kind of shocking to me because they used to have this series of literature, which was like history and biography dumbed down for elementary students. So I'm reading Cornelius Ryan's book, and I find out that all of these German women in Berlin, the mad rush was to get suicide tablets because of the assumption that if, the Red Army got them, they'd all be raped, and maybe worse than that. And I thought, whoa, this is a surprise. I didn't see that coming. I didn't really understand that the world was that horrible. Head McNeck says, I'm 7 minutes behind on the vid, but that Weatherspoons in Faversham was my daily watering hole and breakfast joint for a month in 2018. A girlfriend of mine works there. Brandon Smith says, jargon is elitist gab, a huge red flag to anyone in the skilled trades who actually produce anything. I don't think it's really that simple. In David Mamet's play, Oleana, the professor uses this term of art, right? And Oleana makes a huge fuss about this. Oh, this is all nonsense. This is the way you trick people like me. But there are certain terms which have to be precise. There's no getting around it. So I don't have anything, per se against terms of art or even jargon. I mean, engineers speak in jargon. Philosophers speak in jargon. But the point about jargon is that it's not meant to mystify people. And when it gets to a point where it, mystifies people, and the sole point is to mystify people, then it becomes useless, or so it seems to me. Eminemton says, if Twitter is anything to go by, you could tell people the vaccine contains cyanide and they'd still take it. Brandon Smith says, when engineers show up and start talking about their asses, it only takes a few small words to prove them wrong. Well, okay. Perhaps I'll give you a better example. For several years, I wrote about the mining industry. And there are certain technical things that you need to learn about this, certain things about assays and assay results and assumptions of reserves and all this sort of things. And they're based on probability and the like. And to a layman, they're incomprehensible. And when I first got involved in that, I think in 2010, it was completely incomprehensible to me. And the way all this stuff was laid out, I was sort of suspicion, why does it have to be this complicated? Well, it's as complicated as it needs to be because it has to be precise. Okay, what else do we have here? The older I get, the less I find jargon clever, says Wandering Spurg. Okay. Cobra, is this Cobra Streisand? Is that what this is? People have sex with aliens. That's what I think it's saying. Gamion says, an article 4 Our Times from the Washington Post. Oh, okay, I came into that already. I tend to go from the bottom to the top because it's too difficult to go from the top to the bottom on the chat because people are adding things and suddenly the thing you think you're reading disappears at the top. In any event, Jonathan Pohl says, hi, hello, Professor Pohl, or Dr. Pohl, dare I say it. Alexander Boot is a refugee from the Soviet Union. And I suppose he is best known. Oh, let me read from Wikipedia here. Alexander Boot, born 1948, is a Russian-born journalist and author, previously a university lecturer and advertising executive. His work promotes conservatism and traditional European culture. Born in Moscow in the days of Stalin, Boot grew up there and graduated in philology, a lot of jargon there, from Moscow State University. He became a lecturer in Moscow on English and American literature and also an art critic. In 1969, his son Max was born. In response to persecution by the KGB, in 1973, Boot fled the Soviet Union and settled in the United States, where he worked in advertising, later pursuing this career in the United Kingdom. If I recall correctly, I've read several thousand years from Alexander Boot. Well, he's a permanent resident of Britain now, and he is converted to the Church of England. His son is far better known. Max Boot, crazy name, crazy guy, as Glenda Slag of Private Eye magazine would point out. But someone, some kind person, sent me a picture, an essay called That Puritan Angie Merkel, and it is adorned with a photograph of a naked Angela Merkel. Presumably she is in her early 20s, and she is on a pier, I would guess, or on rocks near a sea. She has a surprisingly attractive figure, I must say. But Alexander Boot goes into the question of Merkel's youth. He writes, it's amazing that the occupation of Merkel's father, he was known as Red Kasner. He was an unusual German after the Second World War, in which he went to the communist part of Germany, leaving the non-communist part. He seemed to be a true believer. In any event, while Angie's own very dubious past in East Germany so little, the photograph on the left, one of many similar ones, was taken when a young and impressionable Angie must have been most influenced by her family's unwavering Protestant values. Yes, you see how Alexander Boot has taken to heart English irony. Yet my impression is that she had courageously cast aside the shackles of Lutheran dogmatism and followed her own steadily ascending path. But while applauding her inner freedom, one ought to mention that her commitment to any other more conventional kind was at the time distinctly understated. In her East German youth, Merkel held a nomenclatura position of Agitprop chief at a regional committee of Freie Deutsche Jugend, FDJ, the youth organization typologically similar to its predecessor that had also had Jugend in the title. Just as Hitlerjugend had close links with the SS, the FDJ was the breeding ground for the Stasi. The two organizations always worked hand in glove, even though the FDJ nominally reported to the party. This organizational arrangement was the same in all communist countries. That's why the high command of the secret police was everyone more likely to come up through the ranks of youth organizations than of party proper. Thus, for example, the Soviet KGB was from 1958 to 1982, run by three consecutive chairmen, Shlepin, Semachazny, and Dropov, who had made their bones in the nomenclatura of the Komsomol, the model for the FDJ. As a student in Moscow, an occasional freelance interpreter, I had the chance to observe Komsomol functionaries and their Eastern European counterparts in close-up. Just take my word for it, neither sexual prudery nor teetotalism figured high on their list of virtues. Their conferences mostly followed the same pattern: dreary communist business by day, drunken orgies by night. This continued pattern established in the early days of Komsomol, where every female member was institutionally obligated to accept the advances of any male comrade. In those days, free love was inscribed on the banners of the revolution, and organizations such as the Union of the Shameless thrived in Russia. One of their leaders was the propaganda honcho Karl Radek, who led nude marches through Moscow. And Lenin's mistress, Inessa Armand, preached that sex was as basic as drinking a glass of water. One hopes, for the sake of her sainted lover's memory, she didn't mean drinking it in one gulp. Following Marx's prescription, women were regarded as communal property, and some local party committees, such as the one in Saratov, even issued written directives on how often, when, and by whom women were to be used. By the time I, and for that matter Angie, grew up, things had become more, shall we say, bourgeois. Various moral codes had been spun out by the party, castigating sexual license as strictly a capitalist vice. But another moral code, that formed by the amoral legacy of the revolution, had irretrievably seeped into the people's DNA. That much all communist countries had in common. Yet there were local variations, such as official nudist organizations that existed in East Germany, but not in the Soviet Union. Numerous photos of Angie surrounded by similarly unclad youngsters suggest she belonged to one such setup. While there's no evidence that she indulged in anything other than youthful exhibitionism, it would be presuming too much on human virtue to suppose that no tactile contact among hordes of naked hormonal youngsters ever ensued. Incidentally, even as Chancellor, Frau Merkel can't resist the urge to flash flesh. The décolletés of her evening dresses, for example, show more breast than many women have altogether. And photos of her cellulite barely contained by swimsuits still abound in newspapers. That, however, is only of marginal interest. What's more relevant is that any holder of a nomenclatura position in the FDJ, such as young Angie, had to work in close contact with Stasi, which in turn was but an extension of the KGB, or KGB, as I suppose Professor Paul would say. Such organizations served world communism, a doctrine as evil as it is atheist. European countries, the GDR among them, allowed more leeway in religious manners than the USSR did. But no sincere believer had any hope of career advancement, and was out of the question for such a person to hold a nomenclatura position, nor, as a matter of fact, would a believer accept a post of that kind. This part of Merkel's background is more germane to her subsequent career than her father's ministry is. In any case, I doubt that the Reverend Horst Kasner rejoiced in the sight of his daughter cavorting naked in mixed company. He would have been more likely to associate such displays with Nordic pagan rites than with anything remotely having to do with Christianity. So let's allow the poor man rest and peace and focus instead on Angie's relevant CV. There's much more than to excite our imagination. Well, I hope he has more to say about this. Angela Merkel got a PhD in the GDR or DDR, Deutsches Demokratische Republik. And like anyone who knows anything about communism understands you don't get to be a PhD without spying on your students and spying on your teachers. Everyone knows this. So what do Angela Merkel's Stasi records say? Miraculously, they disappeared. They're not to be found. How about that? An old friend of mine, a Slavonic studies professor from Eastern Europe, who taught at the University of BC, when we were all very excited about, the Berlin Wall coming down and all the Warsaw Pact countries becoming free, he was a lot more cynical. And with reference, especially to a few years later, how it was that senior people involved with the communist dictatorships of this country somehow slunk back into power, saying, oh, we're social democrats now. Oh, we're Greens now. Oh, we're multiculturalists now. He told me that it was fake, that it was all fake, that it was simply a contrived, a planned strategic retreat by the communists. And I think he's correct about that. And so the question is, why would someone like Angela Merkel be so keen to have a Germany overrun by rebarbative foreigners from Syria and the like? And it is my very strong belief, which I've expressed many times, that this is her revenge against the destruction of her beloved DDR. More on the subject of what the late Roger Scruton called oikophobia, which is fear and or hatred of where you come from. Someone called Sarah Owen, MP. Sarah, of course, is a Hebrew name, which is very popular amongst posh British people. Owen is a Welsh name, but Sarah Owen is neither Hebrew nor Welsh. Well, presumably her father was, but he does not actually show up in her Wikipedia entry. So who's Sarah Owen? She is a British Labour politician and trade unionist born 1982 or 1983. This amuses me because your date of birth is relevant if you are in public life. We know, for instance, that Joe Biden is close to the end because he is 78 years old. Women like to shave off a year or two, sometimes 5 or more. What if it becomes common for people to start shaving, 10, 20, 30 years off their ages? But her given name apparently is Sarah Mi Lee Owen. She is British Chinese, making her the first Labour MP of East Asian descent and the first MP of Chinese descent, female MP of Chinese descent. Yay! Owen was born and raised in Hastings. Her mother's father is Chinese and lives in Malaysia. Let's see a rather extraordinary series of tweets from this woman. And essentially, you British people, you people are historically British. You think this is your country? No, it isn't. It's our country now. I thought hard before posting this because knee-jerk reactions help no one, but as the daughter of Malaysian immigrant, this is personal. Malaysian, but not Malay. No, your mother's Chinese, and they are very different. The Chinese are the market-dominant minority of Malaysia, and the Malays hate their guts. So she calls herself Malaysian rather than Chinese, and I don't think that's an accident. The idea of indigenous people of Britain and use of this term, especially by far right, boo, needs to be challenged at every point. What do people mean when they say indigenous Brit? Romans, Anglo-Saxons, Vikings, Normans, Huguenots. It reminds me of a brutal sketch by comedian Stuart Lee, which questions how far back we go. Our island has experienced immigration since the beginning of time. Every place has experienced immigration since the beginning of time, but as Enoch Powell said, it's all a question of numbers. How many Romans stayed in Britain? Anglo-Saxons, Vikings, Normans, Huguenots? My own ancestors, the Normans, were Viking immigrants, not immigrants, conquerors to Britain in 1066. The founder of the Grace clan was William the Conqueror's brother-in-law, Odo, Comte de Champagne. What was it, 4,000 or 5,000 Normans eventually settled in Britain? Huguenots, a few thousand. In fact, if you look at this genetically, it is astonishing to the extent that Britons who lived thousands of years ago have the same genetic components as Britons today. Well, not today exactly, but if you want to go back, before Britain was overwhelmed by rebarbative immigrants from Asia and elsewhere. Sarah Owen, MP, continues, and in the context of more recent British history, there needs serious self-reflection and awareness about the fact that we took over and colonized over countries, forcing people into poverty and in some cases to the edge of existence. This should be in the school curriculum. Actually, I think it probably is, and probably has been for decades. So apparently, Britain colonized other places. This must be unique human experience. As well as indigenous Britain, we should seriously challenge the term expat, Sarah Owen MP writes. If mainstream media and culture use the term immigrant to describe people who have come from another country to ours, why not the other way around? It's a double standard that should end. This comes back to how British culture and values are defined. To me, the NHS is the best of British. It's the one thing that ties the majority of us together. People from across she doesn't write globe, she has an emoji of the globe. And since you can't put the whole globe on an emoji, this is rather problematic because it shows the European mainland and Africa. What about the other side of the world? Coming together to care for others in a British institution with equality at its heart. But that's a terrible example, especially since we know now that the NHS has been fucking useless in preventing people in hospital from being infected from COVID-19. Going back to February to this very week, if you don't want to be infected with COVID-19, your first priority should be staying out of NHS institutions. But going back to the fact that this woman, she is half Chinese and she is half Welsh, at least ancestrally. Apparently, the Welsh part of her counts for nothing at all. And it's all about her being Chinese. And apparently, there's some sort of, she has some sort of grudge. What about the opium trade? About the Boxer Rebellion? About the little war between Britain and China that happened after the communists took over? Once again, I will say, sorry for the crudity, and I didn't warn you about the crudity before, but model minorities, my ass. I am, as it turns out, half Welsh, the same as Sarah Owen is. And I find it rather remarkable. I live halfway around the world, and I have more commitment to the British people than she does. So it would appear that race is very important indeed, despite what other people might tell you. Let's have a look at the chat here. Kaiser, Reiser, it says Wanderingsburg. Was that an old commercial or something like that? Kotaku says the GSK Sanofi vaccine seems likely much safer. No mRNA, just recombinant protein and adjutant like a more traditional vaccine. It will likely be available the fourth quarter of 2021. Well, that makes sense because it's not simply with vaccines, the king says this shall be done and it is done. No, not if you want to do it efficaciously and safely. And again, are you going to discuss Fox? Did I miss him out? Okay, thank you for reminding me of this. And I went to Vox Day's site, which I do every day, and I was rather shocked and put out, a little scared, because there was this red screen like I've never seen anymore. When you are checking the weather at the Weather Network or the Weather Channel, and you go to the city, maybe it's your city, someone else's city, and there's this red screen, and it's like, oh my God, we're all going to die in a snowstorm or a tornado or something like that. And that's what the screen looked like. And I used the Brave web browser. It wouldn't let me get to the page or I was risking the destruction of my computer because apparently my computer was going to be programs were going to be introduced to my computer, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I thought, yeah, I don't know, I'm a little suspicious about this. So I opened up in a private window in Tor, which is where I'm looking now. And he writes, if Google wants to dance, they're practically begging for it now. That's straight up defamation and completely and utterly untrue. The only entity recording information here is Google themselves. This message seems dangerous. It contains a suspicious link that was used to steal people's personal information. Avoid clicking links or replying with personal information. My screen was somewhat different. What my screen said is was that highly dangerous programs were going to be insinuated into my system. Do you want to click? And didn't seem to give me an opportunity to click through to that. Not that I would have, you understand. Even though I've been going to Vox Day's site for, I don't know, 10 years or more. It's possible, I suppose, that his site had been hacked. But he continues, please stop sending red screen screenshots. I already have hundreds. Then we dance, and ever so beautifully, Google put up a full-page red warning against this page, a warning that it contains malicious software. It did let me through after a couple of clicks. So it smells like defamation. This may have been a major miscalculation on some low-level SJW's part that will hand us skulls on a silver platter. First, there are no apps or software on this site. Second, this site is hosted by a Google-owned company. Third, I know what they're doing and how to prove it to a jury. So if you're outside the USA and you know how to take a video of your screen, email me and I will provide you with instructions. We need only one video per country. So if you see your country crossed off, don't email me. And I see that he's got screens from the USA, the UK, Brazil, Canada, Denmark, Hungary, Germany, France, Italy, Portugal, Spain, Sweden, Switzerland, and Slovakia. And there are some updates here. They're so screwed. I know exactly what they did, and it was not only retarded, but obvious. The Legion is on it. Note the conspicuous lack of URLs that are supposedly causing a problem. I don't know why they simply didn't ban him. I'm certainly not recommending this, but what it would have been too obvious, because Vox Day has been meticulously recording credible instances of election fraud from November the 4th onwards. Well, you see where this is going, and again, I'll repeat what I've said in the past, that the dissident right media in the United States is going to survive, but don't expect to be paid for it if you write for it, because you think you've seen demonetization. You've seen nothing yet. Oh, let's go back to more oikophobia. Jodie Turner-Smith has been spotted as Anne Boleyn for the first time while filming a Channel 5 drama that its producers say seeks to challenge conventions and shine a feminist light on her story. Turner-Smith, a black actress born in Britain, is portraying Anne, who was the second wife of English King Henry VIII, whom he famously had beheaded in 1536. Boleyn, who was the white daughter of English nobility. What, you're telling me that a Queen of England in 1536 was white? Wow, that is 180 stuff. Okay, I've talked about this before, and I'm kind of fed up with this, all right? We can't have whitewashing. We can't have roles which are black. And how do you mean black? Do you mean all black? Do you mean 50% black? Do you mean 25% black? Played by white people? We can't have Jonathan Pryce playing a half Asian person in Miss Saigon or whatever it was called. You want to play by those rules? Let's play by those rules. Because if you want to look at the people in history that people want to make movies and TV shows about, if you want to look at opera and all that stuff, the white people pretty much have it cornered. okay? And for decades, we have let Black people and others, Asian people, sing obviously white roles. And for my part, I didn't really have much of a problem with it. You know, when I'm watching Carrie Ann conduct Don Giovanni, and there is a Black American woman soprano singing the part of a Spanish peasant girl, Zerlina, I'm thinking, okay, she's a beautiful singer. She's, you know, she's a beautiful woman. She does a good job. But now I'm going to start making a fuss, okay? Because if this is war, then this is war. If they're going to try and push us out of everything, well, they think they're going to get away with that? And there's going to be no pushback? Okay, let's see. Marvel confirms Guardians of the Galaxy Star-Lord is bi and poly. This is from out.com. We love to see it. Yeah, of course they do. Space just got a little gayer as Marvel Comics character Peter Quill, aka Star-Lord, is poly and bisexual in the latest issue of his comic book. In the current, my eyes glaze over. Migo. Yeah, let's talk about spandex movies. But I suppose we must. In the current Guardians of the Galaxy comic book by Al Ewing, Star-Lord appeared to die a heroic death in the Guardians of the Galaxy #2. What's it they say on Red Letter Media with regard to the Marvel Cinematic Universe? Nobody ever really dies. But now in issue 9 of the series, we learned that he was actually transported to the planet Marinus in an alternate dimension. Quill, well, okay, you can talk about C.S. Lewis in this regard, right? And other Christian authors. But the point is that this is a reference to Jesus Christ, who was killed and then he came back. And then after 40 days, he ascended to heaven. He doesn't show up on earth and get killed again and again and keep coming back. You just, dramatically, you wouldn't want to do this. You know, if you were interested in keeping the interest of your audience. Let's see, what does out.com more have to say? For now, this coming out has only happened in the comics, but we can all hope that Chris Pratt will be making out with Chris Hemsworth in the upcoming Guardians of the Galaxy 3. Pratt, who plays Quill in the movies, famously attends Zoe Church, a Christian church modeled after Hillsong Church, which does not affirm a gay lifestyle. Back in 2019, Elliot Page, didn't she have a different name back then? Ellen Page? Called out Pratt for attending what they called infamously anti-alphabet people. Pratt defended his church and said he has no problem with gay people. A great way to prove that would be for the actor to bring this part of the character into the MCU. The ball's in your court, Mr. Pratt. How long before these people are demanding that someone like Chris Pratt gets sodomized on camera in order to prove his bona fides? They're not really that far from that. From the London Independent, grooming gangs come from diverse backgrounds, says Home Office's review finally published. Amusingly, their tweet to this was they show something like 16 people, and they were all from the Indian subcontinent. How about that? The Home Office previously said releasing the paper would not be in the public interest in response to a Freedom of Information request by the Independent, but committed to making it public after a petition signed by more than 130,000 people. The paper said that although a number of high-profile grooming cases, including Rotherham, Rochdale, and Telford, mainly involved men of Pakistani ethnicity, quote, links between ethnicity and this form of offending could not be proven. Research has found that most group-based child sexual exploitation offenders are mostly white. Oh, can we have some of this research here? Can we have some numbers? Can we have numbers relating to criminal cases? No, we're not going to get that. You know why that is? because the rights of Englishmen, as they used to say, or the rights of English women, what are they now? It's the right to be raped and then to be turned out and then to be accused of being racist when you complain. Those are the rights of Englishmen and English women now. Someone remind me, if I don't bring it up tomorrow, that I came across this fascinating thing going back, 40 years ago or more, from Planned Parenthood about their plans to reduce fecundity. Apparently, in the 1970s, I lived through this. It may sound crazy to people who are younger, but people in North America were obsessed with overpopulation. And I'm talking about overpopulation in Pakistan, India, China, wherever, Nigeria, but overpopulation here, okay? If we didn't have immigration, our population would be shrinking rapidly. But suggestions were made to Planned Parenthood at the time, and we have records of this. This may be as old as 50 years ago. But the suggestions all seem to have come true. So I hope to be able to talk about that tomorrow. Let's go back to the chat. Finally, Palpcazo88 says, I blame Star Trek. They resurrected Spock. Wandering Spurg says, get excited for next bisexual product. Was Chris Pratt sandbagged by this? Because frankly, I don't think that Chris Pratt is going to play along with this. Are they attempting to, browbeat him into this? That we're going to fire you from Marvel if you don't play along? Dan Ellison says only Anne Boleyn should play Anne Boleyn. It's funny to me that so many of the people who are celebrating historical figures or, figures from literature and opera being played by people who are nothing at all like that, are Jewish. And there was, Robert Evans famously said about The Godfather that to Francis Ford Coppola that, he wanted the movie to be Italians playing Italians, because traditionally in mafia movies, it was Jews. Of course, you've got, Abe Vigoda, and you've got James Caan in The Godfather, but typically it's Italians. I don't know, this doesn't really bother me. Italians played Jews, Italians played Native Indians, Italians played all sorts of roles. I don't care. If it looks real, that's all that matters to me. Obviously, a very black woman indeed playing Anne Boleyn does not look real in the slightest. We already saw this with Margaret of Anjou, where this very ugly black woman was playing someone who was purportedly one of the most beautiful women of the Middle Ages. But again, if they want to keep pushing this, there's going to be a pushback, and the pushback is going to be ferocious. Wandering Spirits, this is KMG, a Matt Forney respecter. I've only had nice interactions with Matt Forney. That's what can I say. I reviewed one of the books that he published, his historical reproductions. I like the work he's doing. Let's put it that way. Chad Chadson says, I was able to access it via DuckDuckGo. Presumably this is the Vox Day column. This is after Chad Chadson, our valiant moderator, had got a red screen. Gamian says, I'm not taking a vaccine for a disease I'm not afraid of. Well, as you've probably heard me say to death already, I think I got COVID-19 a year ago, because I was on Luke Ford's show and I was sick as a dog, or sick as a parrot, as the English say, for about 10 days. With the dry hacking cough and the fever and waking up in the middle of the night and all this kind of stuff. So I think that I've already had it. I'm not afraid of it. Frankly, oh no, we're not treating cancer anymore. I'm far more afraid of cancer than I am of COVID-19. Enron says, Kevin, did you see the BBC 70s miniseries Fall of Eagles? Probably not great history, but entertaining. Barry Foster as Wilhelm II and Patrick Stewart as Lennon. I have not seen this. Barry Foster, of course, if memory serves, starred in Frenzy. He's a ginger like Michael Caine. Michael Caine refused the movie because it's a horrifying figure. Barry Foster was outstanding in that. So he played Wilhelm II, eh? I'll have to check this out. David Wright says, the Irish part of Obama counted for nothing either. No Gibbs there. I have that much in common with him, but you wouldn't know it. The Celt part. Wanwicksburg, Vikings black. Normans were Vikings. Ergo, KMG is black. I am half Welsh, and the Welsh are famously rather dark, as you can see in this picture here, although it's somewhat exaggerated by the nature of the camera and the ambient light. I'm not a dark person in the slightest. So that's it for today's show. I'm going to be back on the air. I can guarantee you that I will be back on the air tomorrow, which is Wednesday, December the 16th at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. After that, guarantees become a little more iffy. I'm not going to talk about what's coming up on the book club and theater Thursday because I can't guarantee you that we're actually going to discuss them because the situation here is so very fluid. My current understanding is that I have to be out by Friday, which probably means there won't be a Friday show. And when the show will start again, I don't want to raise your hopes if you had any hopes because I can't guarantee it. And this is a segue to begging you for money because I have very little, and I would be so ever grateful if you could make a donation to keep this live stream going. And if you wish to do so, my PayPal account is at kevin_grace@hotmail.com. Once again, kevin_grace@hotmail.com. If you're Canadian, you can send me money directly, donation rather, directly via Interac at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And I will leave you with the traditional, in these times of social isolation and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear listeners and viewers, managed to form a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.